Hey everybody, this is Mr. Helton. I'm going to be walking you guys through this slideshow so you guys can complete the scientific revolution assignment. Just like the last time we did this, I'm going to tell you guys to pause the video and answer a certain number of questions. So just whenever I say pause and answer question number one, pause it, answer question number one, and then play when you are done with that question. All right. So the scientific revolution, just like everything in this first quarter and possibly the first semester, we're connecting good trouble to historical events. So this scientific revolution is a historical event that happened, and then we are going to connect it to the idea of good trouble. All right. So what is good trouble? Let's just review this. Remember, good trouble is when you stand up for something or you challenge authority, and sometimes that gets you in trouble. All right. Um, Remember, people in authority and groups who are in power don't like that power to be challenged. So when people challenge them, even if they're doing something wrong, they will punish the people who stand up against them. All right. So you guys remember John Lewis? He was a leader of the civil rights movement and he challenged racist laws in the United States. People didn't like that. People liked that, white people had more power, especially in the South. They liked that black people weren't equal to white people and other people in the United States. And because he was one of the people who was speaking up against this, he was beaten and jailed multiple times. Right? That he is the one who kind of came up with this idea of good trouble. What is good trouble? All right. So pause the video now and answer question number one. And then when you're done answering question number one, you guys can continue the video. All right. What is a revolution? All right, so when you look at that term scientific revolution, we need to try and understand what exactly a revolution is. All right, so in scientific terms, a revolution is when something turns around. All right, so like every single day, the Earth makes one revolution. It takes 24 hours to the Earth for the Earth to do one total spin. All right. And that's why a day is 24 hours. All right. But when you look at it outside of science, it really just means a dramatic change in something and where you replace the old with a new system. All right. So, like an example of that would be the American Revolution. All right. The American Revolution, before the American Revolution, you have England, who essentially controlled the United States. We fight them in a war. We win the war. Now we're independent. All right. So, we'll be getting to that in a couple weeks. But just whenever you have a revolution, you are drastically changing something in favor of a new system. All right. So, the scientific revolution is we are going to have a revolution when it comes to science. So, what the scientific revolution was is it changed the way we practice science. It totally changed the way we practice science. All right. So now, I want you guys to pause and answer questions two and three. And number three is asking you kind of like what is a revolution you would like to see. So essentially, what I'm asking you is what is something that is going on in the world that you would like to see change? All right, so pause this, answer questions two and three, play it when you're ready to move on. So, how did we do science before the scientific revolution? All right, how did we practice science? Remember, the Catholic Church controlled nearly everything in Europe. All right. They had total power almost over everything. You can't say they had power over every single thing, but they had a lot of power, including education. If you went to a school, if you were lucky enough, not everybody went to school, but if you went to a school, you were taught by the monks or the priests in your town. All right. So the Catholic Church relied on the Bible, obviously, because they're the church, the Bible and the classical philosophers to answer scientific questions. All right. The problem with that, though, is the Bible does not address every scientific topic there is. All right. They don't say, like when it comes to one thing we're going to learn about Galileo is that he's the one who did this experiment where he dropped two items off of a tower and he found out they fall at the exact same speed. The Bible doesn't talk about that. All right. The Bible does talk about some scientific things, but they don't talk about that. So the Bible isn't really a science textbook. So that left it up to the church to decide what to teach. And so the church is going to teach things that they want to teach, even though it may not be correct. All right. They also would rely on who we call the classical philosophers. These are your guys who, like back in ancient Greece, and they would, sit outside and they would talk for hours and hours about their different ideas. You know, they're very important people, but one of the biggest issues with them is that they didn't have evidence to back up their claims. All right. And many times it was just based on reason, which reason isn't bad. It's good to use your mind, it's good to use common sense. But when it comes to science, you need to be able to back up your claims. And they just didn't have the tools to do it. All right. So, right now, pause this video and you guys can go ahead and answer questions 4 and 5. Now, what was one of the bigger teachings of the Catholic Church? All right, so they were in charge of education. Obviously, they were in charge of teaching science. One of the things that they were teaching was this theory of geocentrism. All right, let's break down that word a little bit. You have the word geo. All right, you have geography, you have geology. Usually, when you have the word geo, it's referring to the Earth. All right, centrism. Center, Centr. It's kind of like center. All right. So, what this theory is, geocentrism, is the theory that the Earth, the geo, is in the center. All right. So geocentrism is the theory that the Earth is in the center of the universe and that everything in space revolves around us. All right. Here is a diagram of the geocentric theory. All right. In the middle, we see the Earth, our little blue ball. We have the moon out here. The moon's going around us. We have Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn are all the planets in our solar system. Those are also going around us. And of course, you have the sun, which provides light and stuff like that. It is also going around us. That is what the geocentric theory is. All right, so question number 6, pause this video and go ahead and answer question number 6, and then come back to it when you're ready to move on to 7. Now, why was the Catholic Church teaching geocentrism? All right, few reasons. Number one, they believe God created the universe, and when he created people, and so he created people, so they believe that it made sense that God would put his creation in the middle of the world. Think about when someone's being selfish, when you think about a little kid, when someone's being selfish, when they're acting like, they're the center of attention, a lot of people will tell them, hey, dude, the world doesn't revolve around you. Because there's this idea that we have that whatever is the most important goes in the center. All right. So what the Catholic Church was teaching was we are God's creation. The Bible talks about how much he loves us and how much, and how important we are to him. And so if we're that important, we obviously have to be at the center. All right. So that was the first reason. Second reason was, the Bible kind of talks about how the earth is in the center. It also talks about how the world does not move. But when you're reading it's more of a metaphorical there needs to be more of a metaphorical interpretation of that, passage in the Bible. And that is, because God created us and that God loves us so much that we are the center of his attention, not necessarily the center of the universe. All right. And also, the Catholic Church have been teaching geocentrism for hundreds of years. And this is important to note that that's just what people believed. All right. It's not because they were purposely being stupid or teaching the wrong thing. Some of them weren't purposely teaching it wrong. That's what they literally believed was correct, but they didn't like to be challenged. They weren't going to change. They weren't going to admit that they were wrong. All right. So go ahead and pause this, and you guys can answer question number 7. All right. Now we have this guy named Galileo. All right. So here's a picture of him. He's an Italian scientist. And Galileo challenged the idea of geocentrism. So he challenged the idea of the Earth being in the center of the universe with the idea of heliocentrism. All right, and we will get to that on the next slide. Galileo was also one of the first scientists to use experiments and observations to back up his theories. All right, again, when we look at the classical philosophers, they didn't have evidence, they didn't have the tools, because right here you see he was an early user of the telescope. The telescope hasn't always been around. All right. And so what Galileo had that other scientists didn't was he had the proof to back up the things he was saying. All right. So answer the question about Galileo. It is question number 8. Go ahead and pause this and come back to it when you're ready to move on. Now, what was the heliocentric theory? What was Galileo teaching? All right. Galileo, again, was teaching the heliocentric theory. Let's break this word down. We know centric, we know it means center. All right. Helio, there is a Greek word, helios. It's spelled Helios. Helios means sun. All right. I actually had a camper one time when I worked at a summer camp who was a Greek kid, and they had named him Helios. All right. So helio means sun, centric means center. The heliocentric theory is the theory that the sun is in the center of the universe and everything revolves around it. All right. So let's go back to our diagram. Here we have the sun, we have all of the planets, and they are going around the sun. All right. That is different than the geocentric theory because the sun and the earth are switched. Instead of the earth being in the middle, the sun is now in the middle of the universe. All right. So that's the heliocentric theory. Go ahead and pause this and answer questions 9 and 10. Now, why was Galileo seen as such a threat by the church? Why did the church even care that Galileo was teaching the heliocentric theory? The first thing is that he was credible, meaning he had evidence that the earth was in the center of the universe. He wasn't just saying it, and then when they said, "Why do you think that?" he was just like, "Well, I don't know, I just think that." He used his telescope and he had evidence to support his theory. All right. He's a super smart guy. I don't know how you figure that out by looking up at the stars and the sun and stuff, but he was able to make charts and track the movement of things in the sky. And so he had evidence to support his theory. Earlier scientists, he was not the first person to ever teach heliocentric theory. Earlier scientists really didn't have a whole lot of evidence. They might have had a little, but not as much as Galileo. All right. They also couldn't be wrong again. All right, remember, we just learned about the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation was only about 100 years ago, which is a long time, but in terms of history, 100 years is like yesterday. All right, and so the Catholic Church could not be wrong. They were just embarrassed by Martin Luther. They were just embarrassed by a lot of people leaving the church. They could not be wrong and embarrassed again because they're teaching the wrong thing. The last reason, and remember, the Catholic Church taught the geocentric theory because they believed they were important. All right, they saw themselves and humans and the church as so important that God had to put us in the center of His creation. But if He didn't, then how important are we? Why should we even listen to the Catholic Church? Because they're not as important as they thought they were. All right. So again, they're kind of feeling a lot of pressure because they've been teaching the wrong thing, they've been supporting the wrong idea, and now we have someone who is challenging that idea. All right, so go ahead, pause this, and you guys can answer questions 11, 12, and 13. All right, so pause this video, answer questions 11, 12, and 13, and you guys can start playing again when you have answered those questions. Now, what was the result of Galileo causing good trouble? All right, so now we see Galileo causing good trouble. He is challenging the authority. He is trying to make a change in what they're teaching and how they're operating, which, like we said, is the definition of good trouble. What happened to him? First, he was convicted of heresy. Heresy is teaching things that go against the church. All right, you are convicted of heresy. You're called a heretic. All right. And this is just, when you are preaching against the church, they say you're preaching against God, and that was treated as a crime back in these days, right? He was placed on house arrest, so you guys should be familiar with that. He was just wasn't allowed to leave his house. He was also excommunicated. You guys remember this, all right? Martin Luther was also excommunicated. And remember, if you believe in the power of the Catholic Church, a lot of people now thought he was going to hell, because if you're not a part of the church, then you couldn't go to heaven. All right. But heliocentric theory is now accepted as truth. Right. So when it comes to geocentric theory versus heliocentric theory, we know the heliocentric theory is the correct model, the correct theory of how the universe operates. We know it's the sun in the center of the universe, and everything else goes around the sun, including us. Galileo was eventually forgiven by the church, but it wasn't until 1992. All right, so we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years later. He is finally forgiven for the sin of teaching the correct model of the universe. All right, so these were the results of Galileo causing good trouble. Go ahead and answer questions 14, 15, and 16. All right, this is our last slide. What else did Galileo do? All right, this wasn't the only thing that he did. Kind of like I said earlier, he did experiments in motion. So he discovered that two items will fall at the same speed regardless of how heavy they are. So if you go up to the top of a tower, and don't do this, if you go up to the top of a building and you drop a bowling ball and a baseball at the exact same time, they will hit the ground at the exact same time. Because before, people thought that, well, the bowling ball is heavier, so it's going to come down faster. The baseball is lighter, it's not going to go down as fast. But this again is why Galileo is so important, because he did experiments. He wasn't satisfied with just, yeah, the bowling ball is heavier, it'll fall faster. He wanted to see it happen, and so he did, and that's why he is so important. He improved upon the compass. We're not going to get super into that, but just know that modern day compasses and compass technology can go back to Galileo, and he also improved upon the telescope. And this is really what helped him discover his heliocentric theory, is because he was able to look up in the sky. He discovered that there were craters on the moon. Before that, people believed that the moon was smooth. Why they believed the moon was smooth, I have no idea, but they just believed that the moon had like this glass surface over it that made it smooth. Well, when he pointed his telescope up at the moon, he saw that it wasn't smooth. It had craters on it. He discovered Jupiter's moons, and he also discovered more stars in the galaxy, which was important because they didn't know that there was other things out there. People pretty much thought it was just us, a few planets, and the sun. But as we know now, our universe is gigantic. It's constantly expanding, things like that. All right, and all of this is thanks to Galileo. All right, so you guys can go ahead, answer question 17. All right. There's also a couple extra questions that I want you guys to complete. All right. I'm going to ask you guys about why it's important to back up your claims with evidence, and then why, how Galileo is an example of good trouble. All right. So go ahead and get this done.